Welcome to Pay Attention, a podcast guiding you from the chaos of the mind to the clarity of the heart. Here's your host, Holly McNeill.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Pay Attention. I have decided to kind of relax and take a break, so I'm coming to you from my hometown of Rapid City, South Dakota in the Black Hills, where it's beautiful and very spiritual and loving. And it's been raining the last few days, but I'm very happy to be here. And I'm happy to introduce our guest today, talking about something that I don't think we all realize is so important in how we create our lives, and that is our habits. Habits are everything. So our guest today is a chief habit scientist, and I love this. And I'm going to bring her on, Dr. Tamsin Astor. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to discuss the kind of what I call the nerdy nexus between the East and the West.
Yeah, I love it. When I met Tamsin through another guest who's going to be on soon, and Mark, he's just like, you have to meet her based on what I talk about. And it is East versus West. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your education, how you got to be the chief habit scientist, and we'll go from there.
So I did an undergrad in psychology and a doctorate in neuroscience. And then I moved into the field of education because I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the rest of my academic career studying this tiny little area of the brain. Interestingly, the area that I studied and my doctorate was titled Intention and Reactivity, because where I ended up flowing with my career was going into becoming a yoga teacher, which had kept me sane as the mother of two young children when I left academia. Wow. And when one of my children got cancer and I got really overwhelmed with the kind of classic caregiver burnout syndrome of, insomnia and food allergies and weight loss and weight gain and hives, and all of the Western doctors ran all of the tests and couldn't find any kind of underlying diagnosis, but would write prescriptions for symptom suppression. And that to me felt like a frustrating approach to try and deal with what was going on. And that led me down the world of Ayurveda, which is the sister science of yoga, and is very similar to traditional Chinese medicine. It's the Indian medical system. Wow. And I started following a lot of the behaviors, a lot of the rituals, and then my symptoms went away. So the way that my brain works, having ADHD, is that when I get excited about something, I have to study it. Not because I want the certification, but because I need the space to read and think and do the work and then write about it and then be in community and share it and have that kind of iterative listening, writing, thinking, teaching. And what I realized as I got certified in Ayurveda and then as an Ayurvedic health coach was that was two key things. One was that the core feature of Ayurveda is this concept of dinacharya, which is your daily rituals, your daily habits. And that the way we conceptualized what it means to be healthy in the East and the West were very much at heads with each other. In the West, we define healthy as absence of disease. Absence of symptom, right? In the East, we define healthy as, are you seated in the self? And that to me felt like such a fundamentally different way of thinking about it. So basically, I kind of followed this East and West path and wove the two together. And the core feature of what I was doing, as an executive coach, as somebody trained in the kind of Western modality of neuroscience, and then in Ayurveda was habits, was the habits of how you run your business, how you run your organization, how you run your team, and then how you run your own relationship to yourself, right? Your mental body, your intuitive body, your physical body, your energy body.
I love that, Tamsin. And sometimes I speak about the quarter life crisis, and sometimes we have to be faced with these things before we look elsewhere. And what I love, the neuroscience part about your background is amazing, and then going over to explore the Eastern medicine and they all kind of start to point back to these habits and what we create, and that we are creative. And we talked about the intersection of the Buddhist teachings and just the understanding of how your mind works, all coming together to point us somewhere, right? Yeah. And where would you say that is pointing us?
I think currently right now, I feel like one of the biggest sort of tension points is, can we figure out how to be resourced enough and step out of and manage our reactivity? Mm-hmm. And when we think about that in terms of the neuroscience, kind of navigating our way out of the reptilian and mammalian brains, right? And move into the prefrontal cortex and into steps of creativity. Because I think the world we're living in right now, which has become very polar, you're in this camp, you're in this camp, you're in or you're out, you're cancelled, you're in this, that. And then with the role of AI and technology, the sort of concept of being able to step into creativity. And I'm not just meaning creativity in terms of, being a painter, right? Being creative in terms of like your ability to problem solve and write and think and organize your home and be creative in your relationships and sort of resource yourself from the inside out.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that I feel like we're at the sort of crisis point in terms of our society, and where if we can really teach people how to manage their reactivity, which for me is really about, sort of, you can think about it as like the classic Viktor Frankl line of, the gap between stimulus and response, right? And that's where our freedom lies, right? Is learning to control that, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, in my journey, you can learn a lot about Buddhism and love and compassion, and you can sit there stuck in your thoughts and not know how to get there.
Yeah.
Right. And it's that space between action or between thought and reactivity. That's where that freedom is. And so it took me a while to, I really started in Buddhist practices and meditation and finding that clarity of space. But then I circled back to the neuroscience, and I love that you talked about, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is always on autopilot, always looking, always trying to keep us safe and resist change, because change is scary, where the prefrontal cortex is not. So we have to engage that. Right. And it's in unraveling. So I think we talked about this, the 7 little words that are often attributed now to Canadian neuropsychologist Donald Hebb. Is that who it is?
Yeah, the Hebbian concept. Yeah.
Yes, nerve cells that wire together, creating this neuronet that we get stuck in. And that's where our freedom is lost. And that's where our world gets smaller. Yes. And these are all created by the habits we think of over and over and over again. So when we can look at those and recognize them and unravel that, find that space you're talking about, is where the clarity comes through.
Absolutely. And one of the places that we often get stuck when we're trying to change our habits, whether they are, going to the gym or not eating sugar or, a particular kind of mental spiral, right? Yeah. Like a mental habit, a mindset habit, is that, we often get stuck at looking at the wrong part. Right? Because habits are made up of the cue, the thing that triggers the habit, the actual behavior, and then the reward, what we get out of the habit. And, speaking again of the different parts of the brain that are involved, is that the actual behavior is in those lesser evolved parts of the brain. And what that means is that when we try to change our habit by just changing the behavior, but not looking at the pieces around the behavior, the cue and the reward, the environment we live in, the relationships we're in, et cetera, right? It gets much harder, and people wonder why they, can't change their habit. They can't change the way that they are, getting stuck in a thought loop or, overeating the chocolate, candy.
I love that. I love that you're trying to deal with the fear center to try to change the habits. Right. It's really just understanding, what thoughts created those and what, how to alter that, I guess, that reaction.
Right. So, and kind of looking at what is cueing it, right? Because there are 5 cues, right? And what is cueing that loop, and sort of stopping and thinking, is it a person? Is it a preceding event? Is it an emotion, right? Is it a time, right? Because we're all familiar with that, when you have kids or when you live in an environment where you eat the same meal every day at the same time, and you're like, why is my stomach rumbling at noon? Oh, because, 5 days a week when I was in school, I ate lunch at that time. So it's Saturday at noon. That's why my tummy's rumbling, right? I'm expecting to eat,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I love that you talked about it's, we're trying to change the behavior, and really the body then reinforces that behavior, right? The more we create these negative habits, a lot, below our level of awareness, the body starts to fill up with those chemicals that relate to those anxieties, and our sensitivity to stimulus, to these, you said 5, I think you only mentioned 4. So I was curious about that.
Person, place, time, preceding event, emotion.
Okay. Right. I love that. And we get more and more sensitive to, sometimes it doesn't take much at all to start that behavior. And so I tell people that, we're actually in charge of our thoughts. So we can create new habits. But how do you recommend people start to see those behaviors differently and to understand, how to change them?
Well, so I find for different people there's a different route in. For some people, thinking about what their big why is, what their big vision is, what's the sort of big motivation for your life, right?
Yeah.
Like your mission, that can be really helpful for you to then step back and go, what are the habits that I need to get rid of or change, right? That can get me there. So tying it to that big why is one piece that's really important.
Okay.
Another piece, that sort of way of looking at it, is thinking that, when you think about mindset, you can think about it as a decision.
Okay. Yeah, we can. Absolutely. Right. We're not on autopilot. We can choose those mindsets.
Exactly. And if you think of mindset as a decision, then we can change our decisions. You can be like, I don't like this flavor ice cream anymore, or living in this kind of neighborhood, or wearing stripes. However,
anything, right?
I can change it. But it's about bringing enough mindfulness to it, which for me always leads back to what are the tools that you are doing to sort of step into that place. And for some people, there are some coaches out there who say it's mindset always first. In my experience, I've found with coaching people that for some people, they need to, take the action to start changing that loop. Like if you think of that kind of habit loop or that mindset loop as as like a thermostat, right? Like a cybernetic network, right? Where we're trying to figure out where the point is to change, so that where do we want to change the thermostat, right?
Yeah.
For some people, it's the fake it till you make it. Like, I'm going to start behaving in that way and being around people who have that habit and dressing in the way that people who have that habit, and, and changing your behavior. And through action, you start to find you change the mental habits and the mental processing around it, right?
Yeah, and that can work, because that's changing that neural net, right? Nerve cells that no longer fire together. If you fake it till you make it, you're creating new connections, and whether you think they're true or real or not, you are creating those connections.
Exactly.
And eventually they become true for you. I love that. Yeah.
I mean, and you see it with, like, literally by putting a pen.
Yeah.
It makes you smile, and it changes how you feel. I mean, right? Like, even if I'm feeling really grumpy and not happy at all, I can put a pencil between my mouth. It turns the edges of my mouth up.
Right.
And it can change my mood.
Right. And then, like, I'm smiling. Okay. Things aren't all bad. I love that. Okay. All right. So fake it till you make it. That's good.
Right. And then there's the more of that kind of taking it from the inside out approach of, like, working with the mindset and looking at, how am I talking about myself? How am I thinking about myself? What is going on inside? Why does this matter to me or not matter to me? And doing it from more of that way. And what I found is, because we don't operate in a vacuum, usually having tools for all of this is really helpful, and kind of dancing between it and being supported through it can be really helpful. Because a lot of the sort of, 21 days to create a habit, 30 days to create, we don't operate in a vacuum. Like, the sort of the data from which that comes from. So, for example, NASA, when they were, doing a lot of research, they looked at a group of astronauts, and they put goggles on which turned the brain upside down. And they had to wear these goggles to eat, to sleep, to shower, to work out. And what they found was that between about 25 and 30 days, the brain switched the world the right way around. So then they thought, okay, does it take about a month for your brain to rewire? Or does it have to be consecutive or not? So they repeated the experiment, 2 groups. One group at 15 days, they took the goggles off. The other group, they kept through to the 30 days until everyone's brain had flipped. And what they found was that the group who took the goggles off after 15 days is it basically reset the clock. So that was some very compelling data to suggest that it takes about a month to rewire the brain, right? Wow, but they're wearing the goggles 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to do everything. And most of us are not operating in that kind of a vacuum, right?
Right. And so one of my first practice and per love, my teachings is 1 minute 6 times a day. Right? Set an alarm, just repeat. So talk to us about the power of repetition, right? So I understand that when we're not paying attention, we're repeating a lot of stuff below our level of awareness. That's what's making those habits stronger. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, so back to that sort of Hebbian concept, right? Yeah. That when we connect neurons and neurons fire together repeatedly, our brain kind of goes, oh, this person's doing this again and again. And we've all had that experience. Like, so for example, learning to drive a car, right? You learn to drive a car, I learned to drive manual because that's how it works in England, right? You get in and you're like, okay, seat belt, first gear, mirrors, and you're setting all of this stuff up, right? After a while, not only the process of driving becomes automated, but the route to get from, say, home to school, home to work, home to your best friend's house becomes automated too. Right. And it's basically like if you think about like the plastic or the rubber on the outside of an electric cable, that's what we're basically doing in the brain. We're creating myelination. We're thickening the sheaths, the myelin sheaths between neurons. And, it can be, so one of the things that I find interesting about this is that the definition of habit is something that's hard to change.
Yes, right? I've seen that. It's an action. Yeah.
Right. Which creates, I think, this sort of negative concept around and when I say to people that I work with habits, people always immediately go to their bad habits, not to their good habits, right? We have this sort of concept that habits are bad or that we are aware of our bad habits. And, one of the ways to maybe reframe it is our brain's just trying to help us out. Your brain's going, oh, you've done these things in the same order repeatedly. Right. I'm going to help you out by taking it out of the prefrontal cortex, out of the kind of awareness part of your brain. And I'm going to take it into these less evolved part of the brain, like the basal ganglia, and go, let me create this habit loop so that you don't have to think about it. And your brain can be opened up and more free because the data suggests we make about 35,000 decisions a day.
Yeah. Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we create habits, we reduce those decisions. And that's part of what your brain is trying to do.
I love that, Tamsin. I love that explanation because, the mind does not discriminate between good and bad conditioning. It doesn't care. It's the connections. It's a chemical reaction. Yeah. And so when we talk about habits and it's hard to change, the mind also protects you by keeping your habits in place. Yeah. So it's just really up to you to create some new habits for your brain to protect and to automate. Yeah. And it's not like the brain, it's working against you or anything. It's just what you've input over and over and over again. Yeah. But you can change that neuroplasticity, right? We have the ability to change our brains in so many ways. I know that there's studies with John Kabat-Zinn's 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. After 8 weeks, they see a reduction in the gray matter around the amygdala and an increase in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. This is how it works. This is how the brain works. And so if people can understand that and realize that, you're in charge of your habits. And yes, you're going to meet with resistance. Absolutely. Because that's how the brain's set up. This is not something you've done over and over and over again. And it's going to try to reject it at first. But eventually, when there's no pathways set in, it's like, okay, we'll protect this now. And your world changes. And it's amazing.
Well, and also that, evolutionarily, it's not that long ago that we were kind of scanning the savannah, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So evolutionarily, we were wired to to look for what's not working, to look
Right.
for what's might be dangerous, to look for what might hurt us, right?
Right.
And that's why, all of that data on gratitude practices and stuff has become kind of so powerful and resonant in the last 20 years, because people are like, oh, yes, our brain's plastic. Yes, we can change, but we have to also train ourselves to look for what is good, what is right, what is working.
Exactly. What we can change, what we have control, and gratitude. And it's funny because, like, even the definition of mindfulness, moment to moment, non-judgmental awareness. What is it? Gratitude. Why do I practice gratitude? Well, this is why, to create this loop of looking at the world in a more positive way and understanding what you have. And I love it. I remember when I was practicing Buddhism, they had you repeat things and memorize things. And I didn't understand why. Right. But it's all about this habit formation, understanding what you have and what you want and how to get from one to the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And your world changes when you change your habits, because your outside world really is a creation of your inside world. Would you agree with that?
I would. And I think, one of the things that I remember when I first discovered Buddhism, I immediately recoiled when, I read the Four Noble Truths, and it was like, suffering. You just face it. There's going to be, and I was like, nope, I'm not interested in this. And I and I kind of closed the door on Buddhism for like 3 or 4 years, because I was like, nope, not interested in that mindset. And then I dug in a bit more, and it was like, oh, but it's the suffering. I can choose, right? I have the power. And it was that to me was like the big next step in was that sort of that place of powerful sort of autonomy, and kind of woven in with that is that you do that inner work, and then you go back out into your Sangha, back out into your community, and you go, how are my relationships changing? How am I perceiving the world? How safe do I feel? How reactive do I feel? How connected do I feel? How in alignment with my big purpose do I feel? Go back inside.
And it does change, right? And as you said, this time in the world is very scary for people. And, there's a lot of divisiveness, a lot of polarization. And, even politically, there was a time before, if you were Republican or Democrat, it didn't decide whether you could hang out with someone or not. And so those habits of fear are going to be reinforced if we don't pay attention to them. Yeah. Right. Now is the time to say, no, I can change on when you don't have as much control of what's going on in the bigger picture, start here and your bigger picture will change. So, absolutely. Yeah. So you are from England with your beautiful British accent, but you're living in New York.
Yep.
In the Big Apple, right in Manhattan.
I'm in Brooklyn.
Right. So I was over there recently. We tried to hook up. I'm going back to Vermont for the beautiful fall colors, so hopefully I can see you then. But thank you so much. It's just getting the message out there about what habits are and how flexible they can be is so important. So what tip or what starting point or what could you leave to the listeners on, and where do they go from here?
So one thing I think that I found to be really helpful is, and kind of reduces the barrier to entry in some ways, is find the people who have the habits that you are wanting to develop.
Okay.
Because what we're learning more and more is about sort of social contagion, right? Like, obesity is socially contagious. Divorce is socially contagious. Happiness is socially contagious, right? So if you are trying to cultivate a set of habits that you've recognized are really important because of the big, juicy vision you have for your life, go and find those people. Because the world we're living in right now, like Dr. Vivek Murthy, when he stood down as the Surgeon General at the beginning of this year, he talked a lot about the importance of connection, and that we've lost a lot of connection, and that, the sort of loneliness epidemic that came out of COVID and living in this online world space, right? And that 75% of restaurant food is takeout food, etc. Right? So if you are working on changing your habits, do it in community, right? Do it with other people who are on that track with you, because it's also much easier to change your habits and to stay consistent with your habits if the people around you are doing that work too and are stepping into that kind of energetic frame.
I love that. I love that. And if you're listening out there and your immediate thought, your amygdala is like, well, I don't know. I had a hard time meeting people. That's a habit, that thought. So put that intention out there that you want to find people that are talking your language and that are trying to create their world as you are. So I love that. That's great. That's great. So how do they get a hold of you, Tamsin, if they want to reach out? And
find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active. Tamsin Astor, Chief Habit Scientist. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm posting in there, and you can see all the fun things that I'm up to and the programming I'm creating and the speaking and so on, facilitating.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your work, and I appreciate our connection and just the importance of and I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but I went on a journey for 20 years, and it all points back to this, right? Paying attention to, you have this beautiful journey that you're on, and being able to choose, you don't need to live in that suffering, right? The first noble truth is there is suffering, but you don't need to live in it. So helping people understand their habits is a big step towards that. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes. And thank you, listeners, for joining me for another episode of Pay Attention. And this podcast for me has really been joyful. People I meet and being able to bring you this message. So, I hope maybe today go out and you can either start a new habit or just, learn a little bit about it, about the power you have to create your world. So enjoy your day, and I will see you on another episode of Pay Attention.
Thanks for watching Pay Attention with Holly McNeill. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next week on Wednesday at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern.